Today on Blue Values TV, part 2 of fracking. Find out what we're doing with fracking right here in Placer County and what fracking is all about. Welcome to Blue Values TV. Blue Values TV is a production of the Blue Values Coalition. Blue Values Coalition is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating, informing, and involving our neighbors in the governance of our communities. Look for us online at bluevaluescoalition.org. With us today are Dr. Laird Thompson, currently residing in Portland, Oregon. Laird is a consultant with the oil and gas industry and is a proponent of fracking. And with us also is Joe Medeiros from Auburn, California. And Joe is a retired instructor at Sierra College in environmental science and biology. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's talk about what Joe talked about, and that is this is not getting us where we need to go in terms of reducing greenhouse gases that we're pumping into the atmosphere. And that's not just carbon dioxide, it's also things like methane. As I understand it, methane is about 80 times more effective as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Now, what's your opinion on, hey, are we really decreasing or increasing the amount of greenhouse gases we're pumping into the atmosphere?
Well, as Joe says, we need to get off of a hydrocarbon-based energy system. How do you do that? When do you do that? I remember when I was growing up in the 50s, everybody in the U.S. smoked. You know, I went over to a friend's house. My parents didn't, but everywhere he went, there were people smoking. This is really bad for your health. You can say that we have the same analogy. The cars are smoking, the U.S. economy is smoking because we're burning all the petrochemicals. How do we get off of that, I think, is another discussion outside of this one. Within the context of, okay, we're going to be burning hydrocarbons for the next 10 to 20 years anyway to get off of this at a best case scenario. Natural gas is certainly a lot cleaner and a lot better to burn than, for example, going after the heavy oil.
Now, when you say that, are you referring to just the amount of carbon dioxide that's produced per joule of energy that you get? So in terms of, say, kilograms per joule or grams per joule, is that what you're referring to, or are you referring to something else?
Well, there's lots of facets to the problem. One of the facets is as you're burning material in the gas tank in your car, it's a lot cleaner to burn natural gas than it is to burn gasoline, for example. It's a lot cleaner that way. As
cleaner
you
in terms
are
of less carbon monoxide, less other materials, sulfides, and those kind of chemicals?
You're the chemist here, Jack.
I'm trying to clarify what you're trying to say.
Yeah, natural gas burns a lot cleaner. There are a lot fewer pollutants in it that are uncombusted than when you're combusting gasoline in a gasoline engine. A lot goes out the tailpipe of uncombusted materials, of the noxious kind of things that Joe has been talking about here. Natural gas has a lot fewer in them. Oil has carbon C2 through C28 carbon chains in it. When you're thinking of it that way, when you're burning gasoline in your gas tank, you're burning mostly C5, C8, C15 in that range. If you're burning natural gas, you're down in the C4, C2 area, and there are a lot fewer, a lot fewer pollutants to get into the atmosphere from that. The production of natural gas from the drilling and bringing it to the surface is also a lot more environmentally benign than the production of heavy oil, for example.
In what way?
You look up at Coal Lake in Athabasca in Canada, you look down in the southern San Joaquin Valley in California, and you have surface facilities down there where you have oil wells every 50 feet for miles down there. The infrastructure on it is huge. About 60% of all the energy that you bring out of the ground goes right back in, because you have to create steam to go down there and steam up the heavy oil, which normally flows like peanut butter, so you got to heat it up so it'll flow to bring it to the surface. And all of this activity takes an enormous amount of energy and is enormously polluting as well by comparison.
But you're comparing the cleanliness of extracting oil and natural gas from fracking to just the cleanliness aspect, that is, the other material that's put into the atmosphere and stuff. In terms of what Joe is talking about, in terms of just producing greenhouse gases, the question I have is, for every whatever unit you want to use for the amount of natural gas that you extract from down below, are you producing less or more greenhouse gases total from that than you are from oil or coal?
Oh, certainly a lot less than from coal. Coal is a lot dirtier than hydrocarbons are when you're burning
agree with
it.
that, Joe?
Yeah.
Well, I did too, but I have
Not just carbon dioxide, but also all of the other nasty things that are associated with coal, too,
And-
sulfur.
But that's exactly where I'm
acid
getting at. What about methane itself? The leakage rate of methane coming out of
Well,
these
there's a
wells.
natural leakage of methane from anything that's decomposing and so on, but as nobody's monitoring, seriously monitoring what's going on at all, thousands upon thousands of frac sites. You know, there might be some distant monitoring system from an air quality board or something like that, but we're not really watching what's going on. This is wild, wild west.
I have seen 3 studies recently that have looked at how much methane is leaking at fracking sites. One was in Colorado, one was in Utah, and one was in the Los Angeles region. And the numbers I've seen range from about 4% to about 17% leakage of methane of the amount that's released. My understanding has been that it's about 3% at which you get break even in terms of the amount of greenhouse gases that go into the atmosphere, or the greenhouse effect. So all of these are well above the limit. So that's why I asked the question. When you consider leakage of very dangerous gas like methane going into the atmosphere, are you really doing anything to reduce greenhouse emissions by using this natural gas compared to coal?
Well, you're not going to get an argument from me. I do believe that natural gas is the bridge fuel that we need to get us to true energy.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm glad you're agreeing with
Well,
me on
let's
all
see,
these
let-
points.
Wonderful.
You need to let me finish this. It's clear that it is cleaner in lots of different ways, and natural gas is something you don't have to go down so far to frack it. The natural gas that the wells that Dr. Thompson are talking about and so on are bringing up probably a considerable about more, plus other volatiles that shouldn't be coming up either. But as a bridge fuel, I think it's going to get us to renewables and won't cause the environmental destruction that oil and coal does. I'll have to take issue with this. Always talking about freeing us from foreign oil and so on. I really think that these are buzzwords that the industry brought forth because it makes us feel like we're Americans and we're strong and we're independent and to heck with those Persian Gulf nations and all these kinds of things. When the bottom line is all it's doing is shifting the carbon dioxide and methane and hydrocarbon volatile production here instead of somewhere else. Does it save us money? Certainly it would if we wouldn't decide to go find some other place to invade and occupy and have another war, another issue altogether. But we've got a lot of reasons besides petroleum to decide that we want to maintain our military might and so on, which is quite unfortunate. But I keep looking, and I keep looking for real solutions. And I know that the infrastructure that we've established here is petroleum based or is fossil fuel based. We have an infrastructure that we think is going to be the most efficient because it's already in existence and so on. But it's a well-known fact that it's debilitated, it's aging, it needs to be replaced. We definitely know that we have got to come up with either much more efficient or much cleaner methodologies, and we're going to spend trillions and trillions of dollars to get to the next phase of humanity and energy utilization on this Earth, if we make it that far. At least Laird and I, when we have a fight, we just go have a beer someplace, and we don't hurl nuclear weapons at each other and so on. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to point out, since you mentioned Colorado, I'd really like to suggest to your viewers that you go to the RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute.org, and look at the work that Amory Lovins and his teams have developed and what he's calling reinventing fire. And he's done a TED Talk, a 20-minute TED Talk that I think, is better than a preacher at the pulpit in terms of where we need to go. And this is where I get my feelings about natural gas being used as the bridge for only 40 years now, Jack. The next 40 years is going to be hurling investments worldwide, at least, let us be a leader in the United States, national investments at the next technology, which is going to be free, which is going to be, instead of from below, it's going to be coming down to us from the top, flowing over us with the wind and coming down with the sun. Stuff that we have ignored for far too long now.
Well, I'd like to put one addition onto that as well, and that is enhanced geothermal. Mm-hmm. And the Earth is generating so much energy from the core of the Earth through the geothermal gradient to the surface. So that there is far greater volume of energy in enhanced geothermal than there is in solar, wind, and tide combined.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's a little far afield from our main topic of fracking and stuff. How do you respond to our future energy needs, the comments that Joe made?
Oh, I'm in great agreement with him that we need to get off of hydrocarbon-based economy here. And as I say, from my perspective as a geologist, enhanced geothermal, I think, has a lot of value to it in a lot of different ways.
So you see fracking as just being a short-term thing?
Well, you're going to need to frack for enhanced geothermal as well, because what you want to do is you want to put cold water down, you want to put it into an environment where it's going to heat up in a short period of time, and then you bring it up as hot water to steam to drive your turbines for your energy. And in order to do that, you want to try and create the conduits at depth to where you can move the water efficiently. So it's a matter of moving fluids efficiently in the surface of the Earth where you have the value of fracking, whether you're moving water in fracking a water well, whether you're moving hydrocarbons as we are now in the shales, or whether you're looking at enhanced geothermal. I'd like to comment on one thing that Joe said, where it's just a cowboy world out there where everybody's blowing and going with this. And I'll say that, yeah, it really is in a lot of cases. 30,000 wells this year are going to be fracked. How many of them are going to be monitored? How many of them are going to have the kind of monitoring on them that are going to tell you exactly where your energy is going and what's going on with it?
How many are being monitored? Is there any monitoring at all that's done?
Well, it depends on what kind of monitoring you're asking about. Yeah. Are you asking about pollution monitoring? Or are you asking about the monitoring of impact on the subsurface environment?
Both.
Just give you an example, in western North Dakota, the state of North Dakota brought this forth to the legislature, and the legislature decided that fracking is safe. End of discussion, period. Right? And so now you can have 2 acres right here, and somebody 50 acres away owns your mineral rights underneath your property, and he can be working directly under you from a distance. Or if he owns the property right next door, you can have a well right next to you as well. And we point, both Laird and I used this one image out of National Geographic back in spring 2013 to show the number of wells in just one corner of South Dakota. So you can show that when you have an opportunity here. And when you look at that number, and when you look at that image, it's a frightening image of the amount of work that's going down just below you. Now, the reason that he wants to work on enhanced geothermal is that's his graduate work. That's what he does for a living. He wants to make sure that he has an employment for the rest of his life. But it's also going right back down into the ground again. It's messing with an earth that's already, going to do its own thing in its own time and so on. And it takes energy to drill down and so on. So once again, I'd like to suggest that your viewers have a look at the TED Talk that Amory Levins did. It's associated with this reinventing fire. And he talks about, how do you, obviously, if this was our own personal budget at home and you needed to save whatever it happens to be, the first thing that you would think about is reduce your spending, right? Become more efficient. So we really have to talk about efficiency in this equation. Now, the thing that has always bothered me most about whether we're talking about water in the drought in California or energy and the problems that we have in the United States and around the world and so on, we always say we have got to maintain the level of water or power or whatever and plan for the future needs for more. Never in that breath do we say we really have to learn how to conserve much more. Laird and I also use the same graphic that came out of Lawrence Livermore Laboratory on energy utilization in the United States and how much gets used for, out of the different sectors and so on. Where does it go? How is it used? But also the wastage that goes along the way. And we were just talking on the way down here. By the way, we rode in his hybrid all the way down here together. We were talking about the waste of transformers and electrical energy transmitting energy, electricity from one place to the other. On the average, those are 60% energy loss along the way.
60% loss.
60%. You hear that crackling? That actually gives you the dollars that you're losing and so on. So our waste is phenomenal. We spend $6 billion a day that could be regained just on transportation. $6 billion of wasted energy.
And why are we so inefficient on all this, Joe? The answer to that is cheap oil. Cheap oil came in 1901 with Spindletop in Texas. It came into the Middle East. It's been going on for over 100 years. And it was less than $1 a barrel up until the mid-1970s. And so the whole U.S. economy and infrastructure has been set up on the premise that it's going to be cheap oil, it's going to be, it's all economics.
Everyone makes the same, the same argument, but they also include that $100 a barrel, $200 a barrel is not the correct. The externalities, the other costs and so on do not make oil cheap at all. It's
not
very,
anymore.
very expensive. Add in medical costs. The actual costs of the toxins.
So I'm not disagreeing with you that it's the wrong place to be right now. I'm not disagreeing with you that we need to move away from it. All I'm saying is, for a point of clarification, that the reason there's so much inefficiency in the American economic energy system is because it's based on the precept that oil is cheap and it's always going to be everywhere.
When exactly it's
We're
not.
a long way away from that, but that's why we're fracking these days.
Let's take
to try and keep
you
us a little
mentioned.
closer to that.
You mentioned this 60% loss of electricity transmission. We transmit at a very high voltage because then we can use smaller conductors to carry the same amount of power. If you wanted to get rid of that problem or reduce that problem, it would cost you because you would need to use more of the metal that's used to conduct the electricity. Thicker wires
No,
or
we need to
something.
back way away
Or
from
back away on the voltage.
having production in one location and usage in another. We need to have every rooftop in the
that
city.
would certainly help too.
Much smaller, smaller units instead of long distance transmission and so on.
But the long distance transmission, the only way you can reduce the cost of that is by investing more and more thicker metal wires, basically.
Well, you put
for the
good
same amount of power.
petrochemical layers on the outside of them to keep more of the energy in there.
Well, that's how Laird and I agree on another thing. We
you
need
go.
to use the remaining oil for very, very long long-lasting things. The Gore-Tex on his jacket and,
Yeah.
and the plastic dashboard that keeps me from mashing my head up against the, well, also the airbag and so on. So there's very, very good uses for these products, but they need
Sure.
to be long-term. They need to be able to not be volatilized and not cause carbon dioxide as a release product. But also, the energy efficiency that I'm talking about is once you have that energy, you know, the waste, the 60% is on the average of friction, loss in friction just driving down the road. If you have an electric motor, our electric motors these days are so much more efficient than they were in the past. But can you afford? Shouldn't you be subsidized in your business to buy into the new electric motors, which are much more efficient, and get rid of the old monsters? You know, so increasing efficiency is the beginning. As we all well know, it's all about weight. You know, the smaller cars in Europe are obviously, just even before hybrids and electricity and all of that, they were much more efficient simply because they were much, much smaller. I have a friend in Australia that calls our cars yank tanks because we always like to have these massive things, and of course it was all steel and they were much more heavy in the future. But, you know, carbon composites, new materials, reduction of weight, increased efficiency, all of these things are going to continuously reduce. And the whole idea of plug-in electric motors, the phenomenal amount of ability. We need to, you know, there are service stations. I mean, you can go down to a service station every block. How is that? Why should that be different than going in and switching a battery, you know, for the same price at a service
In
station?
the last 15 years, I lived up here in the Auburn area, and I have a set of photovoltaics at the house up there. So as an old oil man, I'm largely off the grid with water well and photovoltaics.
That's fantastic.
So I really do believe that it's not just the mindset that we have cheap oil. I mean, this is an industrial juggernaut that we cannot seem to budge off of. Inertia is very, very strong. It took us a while to get rolling, but now we can't seem to stop this addiction. You know, I really think it's an absolute injustice to humanity to continue to allow this to continue on the way it is. Our responsibility to our grandchildren. We always talk about our grandchildren. Our responsibility is huge.
Yes.
And we're shirking that responsibility.
So the concerns with fracking, I've heard about the nasty water and what happens to that. We mentioned the discomfort with the amount of methane that would be released into the atmosphere. You mentioned the concerns with seismic activity, earthquakes,
Right.
with that. Joe, do you have any experience with that, or Laird, do you want to talk about that?
We
Yeah.
both know that you mess around with Mother Earth, you get little cracks here and there, and the same thing happened here in California. I mean, essentially, the earthquake that happened under the Oroville Dam is what stopped the progress on the Auburn Dam here
Right.
locally on the American River. So we're very curious about that. What are these earthquakes?
So does fracking cause earthquakes?
The fracking itself does not cause earthquakes. What's causing these earthquakes are the disposal wells with the disposal water, because now you're introducing a lot more liquid at depth around faults and fractures. And as Joe said, when they built the Oroville Dam, what you did was you put 600 feet of water weight on top of old faults and fractures underneath that area. Down goes the water lubricating them, and you had a magnitude 5.2 earthquake up there. They've had a magnitude 5.2 earthquake in the middle of Oklahoma recently. In the middle of the U.S., you expect earthquakes out in California,
Right.
but not in the middle of a plate. You should be at around the plate boundaries. There's been a lot of activity, seismic activity in Dallas, in Oklahoma, and so forth, and it all has to do with the disposal wells of getting rid of this wastewater at depth
So
in
yes,
inappropriate
fracking
places.
does cause earthquakes.
Yeah,
Fra-
because the
fracking
disposal-
doesn't, but the activity
But
associated with
But that's
it
a
does,
part of
yes.
it, right? The
Yeah.
disposal
How
wells.
about
But this thing with earthquakes, especially here in California, since we do have
Yep.
a lot of faults around here, if we do fracking here, and we are
Mm-hmm.
doing fracking in California, where is this wastewater going? And
Well, as Joe was saying earlier as well, there are a lot of problems associated with fracking, and I agree with that. Fracking can be done a lot more sanely than it's being done now. You could take the wastewater and you can treat it and then you can re-inject it. Because you don't have to re-inject clean water, but you do have to re-inject water that's been cleaned up to a certain.
So your concern is not so much with just fracking, but we need to reduce our overall dependence on carbon-based energy.
Well, it's putting us in a mesmerized state. It's a smokescreen. Fracking will bring us energy independence. Fracking will be cleaner, et cetera, while we're not hurling ourselves. Yes, to your question, you know, this is just pushing the pain out
Yes.
farther. And
Lulling us into a false sense of security.
Laird and I are going to be pushing up, hopefully, California poppies. I don't know where you're going to get buried, but we'll be pushing up poppies, you know, by the time this ever comes around. But I am madly in love with my grandkids.
Laird, how about you? What's your vision of what would you like to see us evolve into?
Well, are
right
we
now?
wanting to talk about fracking here? It's kind of a wrap-up?
Fracking.
I mean, I can't disagree with
With
Joe,
fracking. With fracking.
you know, on what he's been talking about. As far as fracking, you know, if I were able to pass legislation or deal with it responsibly, and I have had some preliminary talks with Congressman Sam Farr from the Monterey area on this. He wants to put together some national legislation for responsible fracking. I think fracking can be done responsibly. I do not think it is being done responsibly. I think that there's a company out there that, as a consultant, I'm working with a specific company, Global Geophysical Services, and we have a technology where we can monitor a frac job very, very effectively and tell you exactly where all the energy went. We are also working with another company to try and get a DOE grant to where they want to use rocket propellant as a frac rather than all of the water going in the ground. If you simply put down small shaped charges for 2 miles along there and go pop, 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 now you don't put water down, you don't have to bring all the water back out. It's much more effective. It's a much better way to go.
Although it has
So
its concerns.
It has its concerns as well. All of this does. And as Joe has said so effectively, there are different levels of smokescreen on this. But in the interest of getting us the 40 years down the road, yeah, I think fracking is helpful. I think it can be done much more responsibly. Is it going to? Well, probably not in Texas, maybe in California.
Thank you. This has been a great discussion. It's always enjoyable talking with a couple of very knowledgeable people who also happen to disagree on something and yet get along really well together.
Let's go have a beer, Joe.
Yeah.
And that's just wonderful. Thank you so much for being with
Thank you,
us.
Jack. It was
Thank
a
you, Jack.
pleasure.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
A real pleasure being
Yeah.
with you.
My pleasure.
And to all of our viewers, thank you. And until next time, good night.